Hi, this is Justin Sinceri, and welcome back to Epic. We've already covered a lot about making a new connection with your children, letting go of control, and how to use more effective discipline techniques. In this segment, we're going to learn about how to choose your battles, when to use the discipline we learned about last time, negotiation, active listening, and problem solving. We've got a lot to go into. The first thing to go into is choosing your battles. One of the methods we use to influence our children's decisions are negative consequences, timeouts, or T-spots. This week, we are going to look more into when to use these negative consequences and when not to. Not all behaviors from kids are actually problems, and not all problem behaviors need you to intervene in the same way. It helps to categorize a few different types of rules and to focus only on the major rule violations. Example: Thomas has a number of behaviors that concern his parents: hitting his siblings, leaving the classroom, a messy room, climbing on the furniture, not finishing his dinner, swearing, wearing clothes that don't match, and being secretive about what he watches on his tablet. Many of Thomas's behaviors are very concerning and need immediate attention, but some don't. It wouldn't make sense to put as much energy into all of his behaviors as it would into the ones that are the most severe. Prioritize. There are 4 types of rules that we're going to look at: zero tolerance, negotiable, drives me crazy, and let it go. The types of rules in these 4 categories might look different for each family. The point here is to limit your focus on what really matters. Start with the most severe behavioral problems first, then work on the other stuff. Zero tolerance. Zero tolerance rules are for behaviors that are illegal or immoral. These behaviors could cause harm to our children or to others and negatively impact their overall success. Even though these are obvious situations that apply to teens, even little kids have zero tolerance behaviors. Hitting, swearing, or taking items out of someone else's rooms could all be zero tolerance. There is no flexibility with zero tolerance rules. A consequence must be given every time the problem behavior occurs. Every time. For example, every time your child skips school, a consequence could be given. There is never a good reason to skip school and never a good reason to ignore your child doing so. Appropriate discipline would include timeouts and T-spots that we learned about last week. You should not be willing to negotiate about zero tolerance behaviors. These rules are absolute and set in stone. For example, stealing is always wrong, both illegal and immoral. There won't be a time when you will negotiate or compromise with your child on when they're allowed to steal. What other examples of zero tolerance rules can you think of? This list might be different for every home. Obvious ones like hitting or stealing have been said, but what about swearing, lying, being cruel to animals, leaving the house without permission? We recommend limiting this list to things that are major offenses, illegal or immoral. Negotiable. Negotiable rules are for important chores and responsibilities that children have, but that parents should get input from their child on, such as when or where homework is completed, in the room, at the table, or outside. Or how about what chores are done every week? Taking turns with the siblings, or doing the same chores every week? Or how about when to take a shower, like before school or before bed? We are not negotiating or discussing here whether or not homework needs to be completed. Of course it does. But the structure of the homework can be changed. We'll talk more about negotiation in the next section. If your child fails to follow through with what was agreed upon, there are a couple of recommended negative consequences. One of them is to use self-limiting timeouts or T-spots to help motivate them to complete what they agreed on. The other consequence is to remove the agreement and go back to what the original expectation was. Negotiation is something we are going to talk about in a lot of depth in a little bit. What other examples of negotiable rules can you think of? This could be what chores they do, when they do them, how often they do them, when they take a shower, where they do their homework, when they do their homework, when and how much TV time they have, how much their allowance is, what time their curfew is, and so on. Drives me nuts. Drives me nuts rules are ones that are not terribly important but really bother you or drive you nuts, such as playing too loudly, getting their clothes dirty, chewing with their mouths open, and climbing on furniture. Usually, parents in the EPIC groups can identify what drives them nuts really easily. We all have 1 or 2 or 100 of these things that drives us nuts. These behaviors are ones that you may say something about, like politely reminding your child to chew with their mouth closed. These behaviors don't warrant a negative consequence. So it would be, do you mind closing your mouth when you chew? Or, hey, we're not supposed to climb on the furniture, remember? Or, can you please stop chewing your nails? Just reminders, but not consequences. We need to be really careful to not expect perfection out of our children. By nature, children are less patient than adults and tend to rush through things. They would prefer to play outside than spend 5 more minutes double-checking their homework. What other examples of drives me nuts rules can you think of? Just like the other 2 rules we talked about, this is going to look different from one home to the next, and that is okay. Let it go. Let it go rules are pretty simple. These are behaviors that really bother you, but aren't worth intervening on at all. You wouldn't give a consequence or a reminder, you just let it go. Like running down the hall, mismatched clothing, toys on the floor of their own room. Attitude problems might go into this category as well. When your child rolls their eyes or walks away in a huff, it may be best to just let these things go. Take a deep breath and just let it go. This is often quite a relief for parents to let go of things that simply don't need their attention at all. What other examples of let it go rules can you think of? What are some things that you need to let go of? Thomas. Let's return back to the example of Thomas and look closer. Thomas has a number of behaviors that concern his parents: hitting his siblings, leaving the classroom, a messy room, climbing on the furniture, not finishing his dinner, swearing, yelling, wearing clothes that don't match, and being secretive about what he watches on his tablet. First, decide which of his behaviors fall into our 4 types of rules. Which of Thomas's behaviors are 0 tolerance and need to be addressed first? Pause it here and take a look at this list. Which of these is very important and needs some intervention? Usually, parents will say hitting his siblings, leaving the classroom, swearing and yelling, and being secretive about what is on the tablet. Now, which of Thomas's behaviors are negotiable? Surprisingly, leaving the classroom could actually be something to negotiate about. Maybe the teacher, parent, and Thomas can discuss when it's appropriate to do so, or if he asks for permission first, or if he has a special task the teacher gives him, or maybe he helps out with the younger grades. There might be an agreement on Thomas being able to leave the classroom. That's a lot different than him just leaving whenever he wants to. The parents could also negotiate with Thomas about what clothes he wears the next day and pick them out together. They could also negotiate on his tablet usage, when he gets access to it, what he has to do to earn access, and where he's allowed to use it. Which of Thomas's behaviors might drive his parents nuts? Wearing clothes that don't match might be in this category. A messy room might be also. Not finishing or eating his dinner, that could be here as well. Which of Thomas's behaviors can his parents let go? For now, maybe the parents let go of the messy room and the dinner and the clothes issues. With all the other stuff he has going on, I don't think these are very important and they can be addressed later on. Next, let's decide which type of intervention we will use in response to each behavior. There are examples below based on what we've covered already in weeks 1 and 2. What would be an appropriate response to Thomas hitting his siblings? Take a look at the lists. Which of these is appropriate for hitting his siblings? This would call for a timeout or a T-spot depending on his age. More supervision is probably necessary also. What would be an appropriate response to Thomas leaving the classroom? This could be a case of new or more structure for the classroom. I had mentioned some options a few slides back. More supervision could potentially help too, but also something else. Maybe Thomas needs more one-on-one time or a little quiet zone in the classroom or fidget. What would be an appropriate response to Thomas having a messy room? Maybe a new structure on when to clean his room. Maybe the parents let it go. Maybe they give him a reminder. Maybe it's a self-limiting timeout. It's really dependent on how important this is to the parent. Since Thomas has so much going on, this might be something the parents let go of for a while so they can focus their energy on the more severe behaviors. What would be an appropriate response to Thomas climbing on furniture? I'm not going to give you any answers for the rest. What do you think? How would you respond to this? What would be an appropriate response to Thomas not finishing his dinner? What would be an appropriate response to Thomas yelling and swearing? What would be an appropriate response to Thomas wearing clothes that don't match? And finally, what would be an appropriate response to Thomas being secretive about his tablet? Now, this one I would recommend doing the second option of removing his tablet until he's ready. There's just way too much on the internet that Thomas could get into trouble with. And the fact that he's being secretive is not a good sign at all. So he is simply not ready for this in his life right now. Once his behaviors calm down, maybe that's something that could be negotiated. Negotiating a compromise. Negotiation is a discussion between two people with the aim of reaching an agreement. Between the parent and child, these discussions may have a lot to do with things like curfews, chores, bedtimes, and homework. Not whether or not they have to do those things, more like when chores are done, what chores, when homework is done, and where. Kids can negotiate on the who, what, where, and when of things like homework and chores, but they still need to do homework and chores. Negotiation is a discussion that your child takes part in with you. It's a very important life skill. Ultimately, the parent has the final say-so when it comes to negotiations. But don't allow the power to go to your head. Negotiation is a very important life skill. Buying a car, getting a raise, or buying a house are some obvious examples. But being able to negotiate also means that you can understand where someone else is coming from, then work together to find a middle ground. When we simply exert our power as parents, we aren't allowing our kids to practice these and other very important skills. Empathy, cooperation, discussion, listening, finding common ground, and being assertive. Know your limit. Negotiating does not mean giving kids what they want or sacrificing any of your parental values or instincts. Example, Sally wants to extend her curfew from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., but her parents aren't okay with 10 and their max is 9. The parents will agree to anything before 9, but will not agree to anything after 9. Knowing your limit ahead of time will help to reduce any anxiety or guilt trips that pop up in the actual dialogue with your kids. You don't need to tell your limit to your child. It's just a boundary to keep in mind that you will not cross. Parents have the final say. No matter what, parents have the final say. It is ultimately the parent that decides. In Sally's case, if the negotiation becomes an argument, the parents have the deciding vote. So they may say the curfew remains the same, at least until they can all sit down and discuss again. They can also decide on 8:30 as a trial basis, with the chance for her to show she could handle it. And by the way, I know I put they, but this applies to single parents as well. It's not an issue of democratic numerical voting. It's an issue of parents ultimately have the final say. There's no rush. Kids are really good at pushing, haven't you noticed, and increasing a parent's anxiety, frustration, and anger. Sometimes they are so good at this that they can rush the parent into making decisions they maybe normally wouldn't have. When it comes to negotiation, take your time. There's no rush. You can hear them out and let them know you need to think about it further. Don't make rushed decisions. You wouldn't allow a car salesman to pressure you, so you also shouldn't allow your child to do so. Take a break and come back to the negotiation if you need to. If you don't feel like you're being listened to, let your child know and give them a chance to correct themselves. If it persists, come back to the conversation later. When kids don't follow through. If your child doesn't follow through with the agreement, parents can reverse it back to where it was before the negotiation. And again, the child will have to earn back the privilege of negotiation. You don't need to jump to this, however. Another option is to remove privileges just as you would have before the negotiation, depending on the situation. If your child does not follow through with doing chores by the time they said they would, then they don't get access to any fun stuff until they complete their chores. Kids don't like to be bored, so they will typically complete whatever they had agreed on previously. For a curfew violation, it doesn't really make sense to remove privileges until they come home. This is a situation where terminating the agreement might be appropriate. Curfew is probably one of those zero tolerance rules. If they can't be home when agreed, they simply lose the privilege of being out later. And again, they need to earn back the privilege of negotiation. Non-negotiable. Obviously, there are some things you will not negotiate on. Violence, drug use, and swearing, for example. This list will be different for every family, but basically things that are illegal, immoral, bring harm to themselves or others will be non-negotiable. This list will probably be the same as your list of behaviors that you would give a negative consequence for. Find ways to negotiate. Find opportunities to allow your child to negotiate with you. If you're having trouble finding one, make sure they first have the chance to prove they can handle what responsibilities they already have. An easy way to do this is to set up a chore and homework schedule for your child. If they can handle the schedule as it is, talk with them about making changes to it, like where they do homework, what chores they do, or when they do them. That's negotiating. Active listening. Active listening is another powerful way to support your children in making more positive choices. Children need to be listened to, taken seriously, and understood, just like we do. There are many benefits to effective active listening. Improves the parent-child relationships, promotes effective communication, and improves children's self-esteem. As parents, we oftentimes attempt to immediately solve problems rather than actually listening and understanding. Active listening is a choice you need to make and a skill that needs to be practiced daily. When we fail to stop and listen to our kids, it sends them the message that they are not important and their concerns are not important to us. We are the most important and influential people in our kids' lives. We can't be too busy to listen to our kids. Why do you sometimes not listen? Common answers are too busy, too overwhelmed, or just due to my own stress. Next, we'll talk about 5 steps to active listening. Number 1, stop what you are doing. The first step in active listening is to stop everything you are doing. Listening takes time and attention. It wouldn't be okay for your child to give some of their attention to their teacher. They need to give all their attention, right? Your child wouldn't be allowed to listen to their teacher while playing a game or talking to a friend. They would need to stop all distractions and pay attention. The same idea applies to us. Stop what you're doing and pay attention. You should also set aside an appropriate amount of time to actively listen. If you need to make dinner or put the baby to bed, that may not be the best time. Schedule a time to talk with your child, like as you're putting them to bed or when you know the rest of the family is occupied. Number 2, look at your child. Look at your child so they know you are paying attention. Don't expect or demand they will look at you. Having them look you in the eyes is not really important. It helps us to feel listened to, but it doesn't mean they're actually listening. Regardless, if you are actively listening, you need to show them you are paying attention, and looking at them is a great start. Number 3, listen. You have to actually listen. You're not allowed to be on your phone. You're not allowed to be thinking about shopping lists or work. Give them your full attention, listen, and take them seriously. If you're having difficulty, tell them the truth and reschedule. I'm sorry, I'm having a really hard time focusing right now. I really want to make sure I listen and understand what you're saying. Can we try again in 20 minutes? Honey, I'm sorry, but your brother won't be quiet. This is too important to me to not give you my full attention. Can we try talking again after he's asleep for his nap? Number 4, paraphrase. Listening is great, but it's not enough. The next step is to paraphrase. Paraphrasing is just saying back to them what they said to you in a condensed form. Just put their words into your own words. That last sentence there is actually a paraphrase. Paraphrasing will help you to be a better listener, since you must listen to paraphrase. It also helps your child to clarify their thoughts and feelings. They will be able to hear their version of events in a more objective way. Number 5, have empathy. Having empathy means you actually make an attempt to feel what your child is feeling. You emotionally mirror your child's feelings by putting yourself in the situation and allowing yourself to experience it. Being empathetic can help your child to calm themselves down and gain more clarity over the situation. It's not always easy to name how you feel, so it helps to have someone else name how they might feel. This is also an opportunity for your child to learn new words for their experiences, which will further help them to control their behaviors in response to these feelings the next time they occur. Look at the next example. Where do you see this parent using paraphrasing and empathy? This is a discussion between Angie and a parent. Angie says, I only hit him because he called me a name. If he hadn't, and then Serena laughed, then I wouldn't have hit him and I wouldn't have gotten into trouble. The parent says, so you got made fun of, laughed at, then you hit someone and got into trouble. Well, yeah, but it wasn't like his fault that I hit him. I guess I was just so hurt by Serena laughing and I didn't know what to do. You're not blaming him then. You were really hurt. Right, exactly. Yeah, that sounds awful. I know I would feel really embarrassed and overwhelmed in that situation. I'd probably feel betrayed by Serena too. Yes, I was so embarrassed and hurt, like she was rejecting me as a friend. That's really sad. So when you hit the boy, it wasn't really about him or calling you a name. No, it still hurt, but I think I was taking out my other feelings on him rather than just talking to Serena about it. And the parent finishes by saying, yeah. So what do you want to do about that? Giving advice. If someone didn't ask you for advice, they probably don't want your advice. Parents tend to jump to giving advice or giving a solution to the problem. That might not be what your child wants or needs, however. Problem solving. I'm going to break down what it is and how to do it. The first concept to go into is problem solving versus understanding. There is a time for problem solving and a time for understanding. When you're doing your active listening, you need to figure out what your child needs from you at that moment. If they need your advice or a solution, they might say something like, I don't know what to do. Otherwise, they're probably just talking and looking for someone to listen. In the Angie example, she just wanted to vent to her parent after having gotten in trouble at school for hitting a peer. That's how it started. So the parent was wise and used active listening skills. At the end of the example, after Angie had calmed herself and was thinking more clearly, then the parent asked her if she had any ideas on how to solve her problem. The parent didn't solve it for Angie. She put the problem right back onto Angie, where it should be. These are Angie's problems: school consequence, potential loss of a friend, Serena, and the regret of hurting the boy that called her a name. The parent in this example can help Angie to come up with a solution for these problems. How to problem solve. Step 1, identify the problem. The problem for your child and the problem for the parent are not necessarily the same thing. Both are important and should be addressed, but the first step is to identify the problem or problems. You will work on one problem at a time using this process for each. Your child may not be able to identify what problem they're having. In our example, Angie didn't know how she felt until her parent used some active listening first. Example, think back to our example with Angie. She hit a boy after he made fun of her and her friend laughed at her. What is Angie's problem in this example, and what is the parent's problem? Angie's problem is that her friend laughed at her. That is her biggest pain here. Being made fun of is also a problem. The parent's problem might be that their child is getting in trouble at school. Of course, they are also worried about their child, but their biggest pain in this moment might be the school situation. Step 2, create a list of possible solutions for the problem. Focus on one problem at a time if there is more than one. Then create a list of possible solutions with your child. You can take turns providing solutions until you run out of ideas. It doesn't matter how silly or realistic these situations are. Just write down anything and everything that's said. You can have fun with it too. So in our example with Angie, one of the solutions she could have come up with is to put on a superhero outfit and fly away. It doesn't matter if it's realistic at all, because the next step takes care of that. Number 3, eliminate the possible solutions that obviously won't work. Now both of you will look at each solution and decide if it is realistic or not. This is your chance to eliminate the silly ideas that were maybe just for fun, or maybe your kids said it to irritate you. You can eliminate options that are costly, immoral, or involve traveling to the moon maybe, or dressing up like a superhero. Step 4, choose one solution to implement. You may not have an option that is perfect, and you most likely won't have an option that your child is excited about, but pick the best one. Step 5 is to implement the solution, just try it out. And number 6 is to change it if necessary. Talk about the results of what you implemented. If it didn't work, repeat the process of identifying the problem and coming up with a solution. What was the most helpful from the third segment here? Choosing your battles, the 4 types of rules, negotiation, active listening, or problem solving. Make sure you're implementing everything from the first 2 segments as well. I hope you've benefited from the third installment of Epic.